The Russian economy is collapsing today, and price of Putin's death spiral is visible everywhere. Factories are shutting down, workers are striking over unpaid wages that stretch back 5 months, and 250,000 Russians have already been laid off. This financial crisis is why Putin's central bank is trapped in a fatal contradiction. Cutting interest rates mean 1990s type hyperinflation, but keeping them high means companies are going bankrupt left and right. The desperate financial panic is forcing Putin's allies into chaos. As Lukoil races to sell its overseas assets to beat sanctions, it struck a last-second deal with Gunovor, a company founded by Putin's close friend Timoshenko. But the deal was instantaneously exposed. The US Treasury Department called the company a Kremlin puppet, and Gunovor immediately pulled its offer, proving that Russia cannot even sell its own assets without the West's permission. This is exactly why even Russian propagandists are calling out that Russia is heading towards a collapse. The reason for this is simple. When money runs out, the truth comes due. Take a listen.
Реальный сектор.
The real sector of the economy, again with the exception of those working in the defense industry in one form or another, is in a very bleak situation because money has become expensive. Devaluation is rising, costs are rising, and there is no access to affordable credit.
Да, кредитных денег брать неоткуда у всех.
Everyone is facing cash flow gaps, and we're seeing the return of barter deals, just like in the forgotten days of the 1990s. And of course, in these conditions, there can be no economic growth.
В этой ситуации никакого роста быть не может.
Important to point out that that guy is a Russian war blogger who wants Russia to basically erase Ukrainian nationality. He's also a former advisor to the Russian parliament, and on top of all that, he's a defense executive, meaning he's benefiting from this spending spree that Putin is on. But even then, he's complaining that Russia is heading towards a total collapse. Now, I want to explain what he means when he says that money has become expensive. You see, interest rates in Russia are at 16.5%, meaning if you're a company or even a person who wants to take out a loan to build a new factory or start a new business, you will need to pay a very steep interest payments. And that's exactly what he's referring to. This is becoming a huge problem. Russian businesses are now spending a record amount of money on loans. According to one report, roughly 36% of all business profits generated in Russia is going towards servicing the loan payments. And 25% of all loans have overdue payments, meaning companies cannot afford to pay back what they owe, and this will lead to a bankruptcy wave that could come at any time. This is exactly why Russian companies and Russian oligarchs are calling on the central bank's governor to cut interest rates even faster than what she's doing right now. But according to the central bank, that's not a good idea either, because that would cause hyperinflation that would lead to an economic collapse. Take a listen.
By the way, Alexander Dmitrievich Zhukov raised the issue that one more option is missing. What if, given the relatively high inflation rate, we lower the key rate to 3 to 4%? Because some believe this would greatly boost economic growth. We will definitely prepare such an analysis. We agreed on this, but only I'm certain, to show what the path to hyperinflation looks like. Although most of those sitting in this room are familiar with this situation firsthand, we suffered through it in the 1990s. And you remember very well what happened with economic growth and investment in the 1990s. And was there long-term ruble-denominated lending back then? What happened back then was the total dollarization of the economy and the financial system. You remember the conventional units, currency pegged to USD in stores and so on. And the monetary policy, which we are pursuing, during a period of overheated demand, when we have an imbalance between supply and demand, is precisely aimed at preventing us from ending up there again.
Now, the reason central bank is keeping interest rates high is to fight inflation. But this inflation is being caused by none other than Vladimir Putin himself. The Kremlin thought that it could print its way to victory, but in reality, all Putin is printing is inflation. And as the late great Charlie Munger once said, inflation is how civilizations die. That's exactly why Russian central bank does not want hyperinflation, and it's important to point out that Russian central bank is probably the only competent institution that's left in Russia, and they're trying their best to stop hyperinflation, but it is an uphill battle. That's because while central bank is trying to bring down inflation, Putin is just turning on the money printer, and that means the inflation just keeps on going up and up. That means inflation is killing the economy and high interest rates are killing the economy, all the while you're not getting the benefits of the high inflation. Take a look at this. A space company in Russia just had their power cut off because they cannot pay their debt. Now, this sounds like a very bad situation for any company, but for a space company, this is probably horrible. When I started to dig deeper into this story, I realized that this company owes a lot of money. According to reports, they owe around $650,000, which is a lot of money already, but in rubles, it's even more. And on top of that, the supplier of the energy who they owe the money to has been trying to contact the company for a long time, and they just don't get a reply. So that's why the energy supplier finally cut off the electricity. Now, this is not some isolated incident that people are blowing out of proportion. Problems like these are happening all across the Russian economy. The biggest one being, of course, 250,000 Russians have been laid off because of economic problems. This number is coming from none other than the Russian Ministry of Labor, which is kinda hard to believe, but if you think about it, it makes sense. The Kremlin can silence the press, but you cannot silence empty stomachs. And that means the situation is getting so bad that even government agencies have to report on them. Take this factory for an example, which is a Russian nuclear factory that Putin was just bragging about. This factory was able to come up with some new technology or new method that helps them reuse a lot of the nuclear fuel. Definitely a good news. But the people who did this are now on a massive strike because they have not been paid since June. That's damn near 5 months, and that's exactly why these people are clearly pissed.
We are Orgenergostroy, Dmitrovgrad, Ulyanovsk region. We have been working at MIR on the Imbir site since 2020. Recently, since June, we've been experiencing salary delays. Each month, the payment is delayed by a month or a month and a half. Accordingly, vacation pay, travel allowances, advances, and everything else are also delayed. At the moment, the salary delay has already reached 2 months. We ask you to look into this situation and help us because people already have nothing left to live on. They can't pay their loans, debts have piled up, and everything else. At the Imbir site where we work, living conditions are also poor. The toilets are full and not emptied. No water is supplied and we have to buy it ourselves. Lunches have been canceled. There has been no food provided for a long time. As for transportation, we have to get to work on our own because there's no company transport. Workers who live in the dorm are being evicted. Water is being shut off, and we have to rent housing at our own expense. We don't know what else to do. We have already appealed to the prosecutor's office, but nothing has changed. Alexander Ivanovich, we are asking you very sincerely to sort out this situation. Only you can help us. There's no one else. Those who didn't have time to come are also asking you very much. We would be extremely grateful to you. Thank you in advance.
And again, same thing, this is not an isolated event. In all of Russia, the unpaid wages have reached as high as 2 billion rubles. In US dollars, that's about $25 million, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, especially for an economy. But if you do the math based on like average salary in Russia, this unpaid wages situation is affecting roughly 50,000 people. And that's definitely a number big enough that Putin is stressing. That's because when wages stop, hope stops. Now, of course, for Ukrainians, there is some good news in all this, because if Russian economy slows down, the government suffers too. When people are not getting paid, the Russian Federal Tax Service cannot tax the payments and put fees on those payments like they usually do, and that means Russian taxes are going down. This affects Putin's bank account, and that means it affects the front lines. In fact, in October, Russian federal budget revenue dropped by more than 12% year on year. Definitely a great news because as budget revenues go down, the Russian deficit keeps on increasing. And that's something even Russian media cannot ignore.
Kommersant reports that the budget deficit in Russia is growing. The budget returns to a deficit. In October, annual budget revenues lagged behind expenditure by another 0.4 trillion rubles. The federal budget deficit grew by another 400 billion rubles to 4.2 trillion, around $51 billion, or 1.9% of GDP. According to updated calculations of the Finance Ministry, in the final 2 months of the year, the gap between spending and revenues will grow even more, up to 5.7 trillion rubles, or 2.6% of GDP. The reason? The irreducible level of required state expenditure amid reduced expectations for oil and gas revenues and other budget revenues.
The irreducible level of required state expenditure is just Russian for saying that Putin is carrying out a war that Russian economy cannot afford. Who would have thought my Russian would get better after all this coverage? This could be why we're seeing defense companies in Russia actually slow down for the first time since this war started. Now, of course, this is not me saying that they're shutting down factories or anything like that. We know Putin does not want this war to stop, and that's why defense company will be the last companies in Russia to actually turn off their lights. But we are seeing salary reductions and we're seeing layoffs at some of these factories. Because of all this, even the Russian central bank is warning that country's economy could slip into a recession by the end of this year. And as we just heard from the Russian media, they expect the revenues to keep on falling for the last 2 months of this year, so November and December. Now, the big reason behind that trend is the new US sanctions, and on top of that, the US is going above and beyond to make sure Russia cannot find loopholes around the sanctions. You guys remember Lukoil, right? That was one of the 2 countries that the Trump administration just sanctioned. And on top of that, it was like the biggest private oil company in Russia, and they had a huge global footprint. They have operations in Asia, Europe, Middle East, South America, and even here in the United States. From my research, it seems that they have like 100 or so gas stations in New Jersey and New York. Well, because of sanctions, they had 1 month to sell off all their international assets. So they have until like December 22nd, so 10 days from now. So let me ask you guys a question. If you were in a situation like this where you have to sell off your assets in a very short amount of time, and of course you want to get the best price, right? When you're selling something, what would you do? Wouldn't you want multiple companies to send you offers so you can bid them against each other and hopefully get the best price? Well, that's not exactly what Lukoil did. They just very secretly signed a deal with a Switzerland-based company, Gunnovar, to sell all their international assets. It's almost like this company was not interested in getting a good price. And there's a very good reason behind this. You see, this Gunnovar company has a very complicated history, to say the least. So let's put on our Charlie Kelly hat and figure out what that history is. So, this Gunnovar company was founded by 2 billionaires in the year 2000. One of them was a Swedish billionaire named Trubon something. I can't pronounce the name correctly, but we'll show his face. And the other guy is a Russian billionaire or Russian oligarch named Timoshenko. Now, this Timoshenko guy is important because he made his money in Russia in St. Petersburg in the 90s. This is the same town where Putin is from, and on top of that, in the 90s, Putin was the deputy mayor of the city. Well, as the deputy mayor, one of Putin's responsibility was overseeing foreign trade and energy deals, all the while Timoshenko was in the same city trading oil. So I'm sure you can imagine there were some handshakes happening between this guy and Putin. Well, then in the 2000s, right when Putin is getting into the Kremlin and becoming the president, this company is founded. Now, this company is based out of Switzerland, so it's not a Russian company, but out of nowhere, this company becomes a major player in Russian oil exports. They get pipeline deals, terminal deals, and they even get contracts with state-linked producers in Russia. This was a very fast ascent, to say the least. So that's why people started speculating. Maybe Putin has a hand in the success of this company, and maybe even Putin has a stake in how much money this company makes. Well, you guys know the golden rule of when dealing with Russia. Any news out of Russia, don't believe anything until the Kremlin denies it. Well, in 2007, the Kremlin publicly came out and said, hey, Putin owns no part of this company, so can you guys just please stop talking about it? Because that's exactly how the internet works. Now, this isn't even that bad. But when Putin invaded and annexed Crimea in 2014, the Russian oligarch Timoshenko was able to sell his stake night before the sanctions were announced on him for being a Russian oligarch after this invasion. Now, there are a couple of ways of looking at this very fortunate timing. You can say maybe they just got lucky, the timing was great, or you can say that this was all a facade and it still has very strong influence or maybe even ownership in the company, and indirectly that means Putin also has control over the company. Now, if some random YouTuber can know all this, you know that the US intelligence knows about this too. And guess what? The Treasury Department was not gonna let this slide. So they made this statement. President Trump has been clear that the war must end immediately. As long as Putin continues the senseless killings, the Kremlin's puppet Gunavar will never get a license to operate and profit. This is the official statement from the Treasury Department, and it tells you everything you need to know about this company, Kremlin's puppet. Now, of course, the Gunavar CEO denied the allegations, saying, hey, we have no dealings with the Kremlin. But he also pulled the offer to buy Lukoil's asset in the same statement. So basically what he was saying, hey, all that illegal stuff that you're blaming us for, we are not doing that. But we'll stop it anyway now that you bring it up. This is definitely a huge hit for Russia because this was the largest private oil company in the country and they had a very big global footprint. And for anyone else who's saying that the US dollar is losing its influence around the world, this is a great example to say otherwise. US can decide from a tweet if a Russian company across the world can sell its assets or not. If that's not having a global reserve currency, I don't know what is. I'm sure you guys will be able to find some random example of some random guy buying 2 drones from China for 200 yuan. But that doesn't mean that China is replacing the US dollar. That also doesn't mean that the Russia is replacing the US dollar. The ruble may still exist, but the illusion of power that Russia had is gone. At the end of the day, there's only one country that can regulate international business, and that country is the United States of America. We'll continue reminding that to Russians every time they start one of their propaganda campaigns. Now, of course, that wouldn't be possible without support from you guys. So thank you so much for liking, subscribing, and becoming a member. All that helps us get our message out to more and more people. So, my name is Sam, and I'll see you guys in the next one.